Started. Clearly I have more questions than this congregation today.
Oh, goodness.
For your sermon.
I need to be ready.
I was just taking notes and notes.
Between Seth, Devin, and Ben, I need to be ready.
Yes. Any other questions out there? All right. Okay. Carla tried. We tried to gather up questions from y'all. All right. We've got a few. As soon as we get the cue from the booth, we'll let you know we're going to start talkback.
There's one.
Uh-oh. There's a question?
Yeah, paper. Yeah.
I see that hand. All right, we're live and we're accepting questions for Talkback. We are so grateful for the opportunity to be here in the sanctuary today with a Talkback. Thank you, Carla. We're receiving questions. You can send questions. You can text me. You can send them to the email Talkback at Myers Park Baptist, and we'll try to take care of those questions as well. Or we'll have a chance at the end here to come up to the mic. Mia, it was such a joy to hear you preach today. Always nice to be in the other seat and to hear a proclaimer preach a word. So thank you for a compelling sermon, a powerful sermon, a sermon based on a show that you and I are just nerds about. We just love. This is like one of our favorite shows of all time, both of us. Some of you haven't seen it yet, so excuse us for geeking out about this show that we love, but it does provide a metaphor, powerful story, I think similar to the story that we have from Exodus today, and so we're really excited. We have a bunch of questions here, mostly mine, and then some others from the congregation. I thought we might start with a question about damage. You start your sermon with your own assessment of the damage you have witnessed in your lifetime, just in your lifetime, which in the life cycle of those in our congregation is rather short comparatively to the average. Just the amount of damage you mentioned in your sermon was massive, vast, hard to digest all of that. I'm wondering if, from your perspective, two-part question. Have we appropriately taken time since the pandemic started, or now 2.5 years after it began, to assess the damage? Have we really done a full assessment of the damage as a church, as a community, as people? And if you were to assess the damage for us, what would you assess the damage to be?
No, I don't think we've taken time to assess the damage, but I don't think that's all our fault. It's not physical. A lot of it's not physical. So if you didn't lose somebody close to you due to COVID, or a couple of people, I mean, I know people who lost 5 family members, right? So their damage is very much like palpable, it's real. But if that didn't happen for you, your losses, related to the book that you made us read as a staff, The Myth of Closure, your losses are ambiguous losses, which means they're very hard to calculate and to understand. Whereas in the past, when you were assessing the loss of, those of us who went through Hurricane Katrina, that was very tangible. We lost things, we lost houses, we lost shoes, clothes, pictures, video, recordings, whatever, right? So it was a lot easier, and it didn't happen quickly. The assessment didn't happen quickly, but it was very much an immediate loss. It did not happen over time, necessarily. It was very immediate. This pandemic, the losses happened over time, and they're still happening. I mean, I know somebody who's a flight attendant who said people were sobbing in the airport when, all these flights have been getting canceled lately. People were missing weddings, they're missing funerals. So we're 2.5 years into this, and we're still experiencing loss. So it's not over. It's kind of hard to calculate while we're in it. And so I think a lot of even scientists are trying to understand, health-wise, what have we lost? For those of us who had COVID, I've never tested positive, but who knows, right? Have we lost something health-wise? Have we lost immune capabilities, right? They're seeing a lot of people with low T cells who have had COVID. So it's indicating a loss of immune, health, immunohealth. And so they don't know, though. It's very hard to prove. If I could assess the loss, I feel like there's definitely been a loss of a sort of ease in our way of life. I don't know all the different things and how it affects each person. I think it affects different people on different levels. But, you know, when I think about flying, since I've been flying recently, there's a loss of comfort in the airport. I used to like the airport. I'd go there, get there early, try to get a rocking chair. You know, it's hard to get a rocking chair in Charlotte. You know, they have a drink at the bar. I'm not doing any of that. There's a loss of sort of the first part of your trip, which is the airport, is just completely anxiety, complete anxiety. There's people acting up in the airport. They're yelling. They're coughing on you with no mask. I mean, it's so, you know, I don't know how to assess that. And it's different for different people, right? If you're like really wealthy and you go to the Sky Miles Lounge, then you have to deal with all that. But, you know, so I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I do think there's something about the ambiguous loss that makes it difficult for us to calculate that.
Yeah. The book Mia's referencing is called The Myth of Closure. It's about ambiguous loss, which is sort of like revolutionizing the study of grief in the way that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Death and Dying revolutionized the study of grief years ago. So ambiguous loss, the myth of closure. All right, so obviously in this time of damage and as we're assessing the damage, we're assessing the sense of our losses. In many ways, we all find ourselves in a moment.
I just want to say one more thing. So for example, the SCOTUS stuff is happening, right? Massive loss. Many of us will feel that in increments, if at all, personally. You see? So like, I might not feel the Roe v. Wade thing right now. I might feel it 3 years from now. I don't know, right? Because it's not affecting me personally. So it's very hard to calculate something that's happening to different people at different times.
It's a good relationship between SCOTUS decisions that are taking freedoms away and sort of what we lost during the pandemic, things that we feel the effects of down the road, right? And we don't really know how to assess the full level of the damage until much later. And we're just kind of stunned in the moment of it and trying to imagine what it might be. But yes, a huge amount of loss of freedom. So we're all in this sort of wilderness period. As a society, moving from before the pandemic to after, and I know there is no before, we'll get there. And we're in that in-between, but I think you also placed us there as individuals, and you placed us there as a church. In this wilderness moment, in the in-between of the old and the new. We're not really at the new yet, we're not back at the old, we're somewhere stuck in the wilderness of the in-between. This between place, this Exodus place, right? So I was thinking about that and wondering, because one of the questions that we received here is a quote from, to let go of the past and embrace the now, and asking to give us ideas of what that looks like at Myers Park Baptist Church. And one way I might add to that question from some of my own reflections on your sermon what are the touchstones for living together in the wilderness in between? So, like, what is the way out for us in this place?
I think the way out is openness and imagination. I saw somebody tweeting about how disgusted they are with just all of our judicial system right now. Just as, you know, it just seems very hopeless. And I, in the same way that people can be disgusted with churches and with all kinds of communities that they are tethered to, I think, and you know, I sometimes go to my burn it all down place, but I've lived through all these catastrophes, and I sometimes believe that we got to start from scratch, and you know, abandon those systems. They're not working. So, open to reimagination. Even pushing beyond, when I think about people who talk about, you know, reforming systems, there are some systems that are not reformable. Is that a word? Right? They're not going to get better. We got to just, you know, eradicate them and start over with something new and fresh, new ideas, new systems for governing. When the world ended in Station 11, there was no police to reform. There were no police to reform. There were nothing. It was nothing. They had to create their own law in their own system, and sometimes their system was deadly, they would kill people that they didn't trust, right? They had little prisons in their makeshift homes. But I think we have to start from scratch and open up our imagination and be okay with the unknown and the unfamiliar. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. I love that answer. I think that plays out over and over again in the biblical text. Like, hope is always the new creation, the new thing, what God is doing in the world that's new. And I think about that in terms of what happened in Station 11. I think about that biblically. I think about that in the world that we are in now. And I was reminded as you were talking, it sounded a lot to me like, as you know, one of my favorite authors, Baldwin, says that nothing is lost as long as there is responsibility, because if there's responsibility, then someone can take the responsibility to start over and to begin again, which is, of course, the title of Eddie Glaude's book on Baldwin, Begin Again.
Yeah.
And Glaude is sort of referencing, and Baldwin is referencing, that you can't reform a broken system that's as broken as ours. You just got to start over. You know, and then who's got the imagination to create the new thing, to begin the new thing, to imagine where we're going?
Yeah.
So I think that's, we had somebody in here that said something very similar to that. Jesus made change and hurt so many, he was crucified and then he rose. So let's rise.
Amen.
I thought that was a good theological.
That's right. Jesus was breaking down systems too. He said, this is not working. I'm doing a new thing. We're doing something new. This is a new movement. We're abandoning some of the old ways of thinking and being in the world because they're not serving everybody. Right.
We're carrying some of the old with us, but not all of it.
Yeah.
And we're starting a new thing called the church, right? That's this new thing. Yeah, and I'm thinking about how Jesus' opposition to the temple system, you know, a lot of people say, well, Jesus didn't say enough about Rome. And that may be true. There's stuff there, but not enough maybe that's explicit. But he certainly was clear that the temple could not be reformed, right? There was no reforming the temple. It had to go. Tear this down, and in 3 days I'll build something new in its place, right? Yeah. It's not we're going to reform the temple.
Yeah.
So that maybe that's instructive for us. All right, taking a little bit of a side route, we had a question about human beings, and I think this question comes under the phrase, the sort of the overarching theme of we're both too proud as human beings, and maybe not proud enough, maybe not imagining. Having a big enough imagination. So here's this wonderful two-part question. Why do we as human beings always imagine ourselves ending as a species in the near future? According to paleontologists, most species on this planet last from 1 to 6 million years. If we were to end, we would be the shortest-lived species to ever exist, since we have only been here for about 150,000 years and have only had urban centers for 5,800 years.
Wow.
Now, that second part I would take auspice with. But anyway, not putting out the possibility of our self-destruction, but I'm wondering why human beings have always imagined it that we would end, since it would be an anomaly for us to end so quickly. What would it be like if we imagined our existence being for a long time and only just beginning right now? It's a pretty imaginative question. Yeah.
I don't know about all the other species, but I do know that it seems like we're the most destructive. I mean, pollution, the way we, kind of move through the earth. If we were to compare ourselves with some of the other species, I don't see that same level of destruction. I am not a scientist, so please do not take my word for it. But I think that when we are faced with trials and tribulations, as the elders of my youth used to say, there's this idea that the end is coming, right? That this can't be life. And I think part of that is our discomfort with suffering. So we suffer and this can't be it. It's the last and evil days. As they say that a lot growing up in church. It's the last and evil days. And I'm like, it's been that for 10 years. When are we going? Right. So I think that there is generally a discomfort with suffering, and I think even more so in the Christian flavored world, there's a discomfort with suffering, which is strange because we honor a man who suffered on a cross. So that's really strange. Our dissonance, that doesn't make sense sometimes, right? The way that we kind of celebrate this man's death on Good Friday, but we have this distance. We do not like the idea of suffering. So we say things like, oh my gosh, it's the last and the evil days. The world's ending. Probably not. And even when the end of the world came in Station 11 or some of the other eras that we've heard about, the Ice Age and all that stuff, there were still people left building a new world. There were still people left. It might have been a fraction, but the world didn't actually end. And I think even this hype around climate change a lot of that language is about the world ending. If anything, we would be the ones to go, and the earth will still be here recovering from all the damage. The earth is saying, I stood looking out over the damage. That's what the earth is saying to us every time, pollution is in the air or something like that. So I think it's our obsession or our avoidance of suffering, our obsession with and avoidance of suffering.
I love that because it leads into another question that I have here about what we do with suffering. And so thinking of the losses that we experienced in the pandemic and the losses that we feel when we're in the in-between, in the wilderness between the old and the new, the loss, the pain of the loss, the suffering of what is lost leads us to certain behaviors that you tried to mention in your sermon and call out, for instance, with the title, There Is No Before. But you said at one point that we often end up, like the Israelites, romanticizing a kind of slavery, romanticizing the past in a way that is, in some ways, opposition to the new freedom God is calling us to walk into, and in opposition to the way out of the in-between wilderness period. And you kind of said traumatized people act out in that time, which we see the Israelites living in this place of precarity. The wilderness, the place of freedom, is a place of precarity. So what would you offer to people about it? Is, how do we avoid letting our suffering and our feelings of loss from leading us toward an unholy romanticizing of the past or of slavery?
I mean, I think it's natural, unfortunately. I was reading this book that I mentioned in the sermon, and there is an unknown Negro spiritual called I Wish I Had Died in Egypt Land. And the writer says, children grumbled all the way, I wish I had died in Egypt land. It's a fear of death. When you think about you're freed. Okay, the Emancipation Proclamation has happened, you're free. But all of a sudden you have to make a life in a world that was not prepared for you to make a life, right? At least back at Master's house, you had the scraps of the pig. Now you have nothing. You have no money, you have no home, they've taken everything from you, you might have no family because they've separated you. And so you're out here somewhere thinking, God, well, at least I would be alive. So there's this fear of death that can sometimes hold us captive and keep us from thinking on our feet and keeping us from tapping into those animalistic instincts that I feel that other animals who do not have, that we know of, as sophisticated of a brain, they just tap into their animal instinct. I got to kill this thing and eat it. Yeah. We go to I had it good back there. We don't tap into that instinct that can really activate our imagination.
Yes, so maybe we need some more of that animal instinct in us, tapping into it, What is it that causes a person to sing the other spiritual that I'd rather be dead, I'd rather be in a grave, right, than buried as a slave, right? That death is better than slavery, right? And willing to risk death than to be enslaved again. Yeah. That feels more animalistic to me, right? I got to get out of this. I'm not looking back.
By any means necessary, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to make it. I'm going to, As opposed to like the kind of Stockholm, I'm good. Things are good here with my captors. I'm identifying with my captors and that kind of thing. Another good movie for those of you who like stuff like this is Hunger Games. Was a good book as well. But there's that element too of when they revolt. And there's a before and there's an after, and you lose things in the revolution.
Right, that's right. Yeah, but it's like if you've calculated the cost, though.
You've calculated the cost, you've done your research, you've learned what you need to learn. People are studying which plants are poisonous, which plants are edible. So when I get stuck out in the wilderness, I know what I can eat. right?
That's right. Yeah, they're getting ready.
They're getting ready. So maybe there's something about preparation as well for this, if you get the privilege of being prepared for the Exodus.
And I want to move to that because I think that's where I think manna comes in a minute. But I want to open it up now because we're out of questions that I've got from you all up here. So now the mic is open. If you've got a question that has arisen during our conversation, I want you to think about it and bring it to the mic. And as we wait for folks to do that, and I hope some will, my question is around this manna and the preparation. What is the work that is needed in the now, in the in-between? And maybe even further, what is the manna that we may not see in this moment as manna?
I think about the start of the pandemic when we were stuck in the 80s with our technology here. And we had to just take what we had. We didn't have Wes. Yeah. Thank God Wes came, gosh. we didn't have
Thank
Joe,
God
we didn't
Wes.
have anybody, Hannah. But we were just sort of piecing together the various amateur skill sets that we all had and said, okay, we're gonna make this thing better every week. We are not going back to what it looked like March 8th, 2020. Every single week, we have to take what we have with our cheap skills that we learned on the internet and figure out how to make this better because our people are depending on this content for hope and for survival, right? Not just because we wanted to do it because it looked cool, but people were depending on this for survival. And so I think about that when I think about co-creativity, about taking what you already have, sort of surveying. There's a congregation of people. Everybody in here comes with some sort of knowledge. How can we put that all together, the pieces of the flakes on the ground, and create something that can sustain us?
I love that, and you undersold your own involvement in helping us get through that period. Mia basically was producing the worship service with her skill set until we had Wes for like weeks and weeks and weeks and months on end, curating that. And we're so grateful for the work that you did there to help us get by in that time. I love what is that quote? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think the pandemic did create forced changes.
Yes.
That were changes that we probably would have gone kicking and screaming into and taken us years and years to do, that we had to do overnight. And we're grateful for some of those.
Yeah.
Some of them we're not so grateful for because they forced things that were upon us that we weren't prepared for and are not necessarily great, good and wonderful things. But a lot of it we had, it was amazing how quickly we had to move into a new phase as a congregation, as a community, as people.
The creativity that I saw, particularly that first year of the pandemic, and not just with this church, but like all the projects that I was working on across the country, the creativity was astounding. And there were people who were coming out to us saying, I'm a disabled person who is hard of hearing, and this is the first time my church has ever put captions on the screen. It took the pandemic to sort of push that creative edge for us to, and then it opened up possibilities for people who are marginalized to join us. And that was happening across the country, and it was beautiful. And then I saw things maybe around like January take a turn backwards. When people got a little bit of hope that we can have conferences in person again and we can do things in person, all the creativity that we had done in the pandemic, it was like it vanished, it went out the window. And so I found myself asking, well, what about all the strides we make? What about that person who can't hear? What about that person who can't see? What about and it's just like, everybody was so excited to go back to Egypt.
Yes. Oh yes, there's a desire for that normalcy, whatever it is, and you've called that out as being a problem in and of itself. And a desire to go back to what once was, because there's a comfort there. There's a sense of this is what we know. We feel good about it, or some people do at least. And almost a rolling back of all the progress that was made in a lot of ways during the pandemic, going forward. It's ironic and just kind of sad that also kind of feels how the political environment has felt. Like, wasn't it that long ago that we were marching in the largest protests ever in American history after the murder of George Floyd? That wasn't that long ago. And now look at where we are. And it's the same sort of spirit that is trying to roll us back into pre-pandemic behaviors, is trying to roll our country back and our world back into pre-pandemic politics. Actually long before that, to be honest, at this point, with the freedoms that have been lost. Yeah. So there's this sort of, it's like we're beating back against this force of regression in our culture. And you're calling us to creativity, which I love, and I think that's where the energy of the Spirit of God is moving right now, as you're calling it, is in this creative. You're calling us to be co-creators with God. Will we make bread with God? Will we work together to develop the new thing that God is calling us to build, and do it together with hope? And I think that's where there is hope in that creativity, in that idea that there is something else that we can build together,
Yeah. Okay,
All right, we got questions.
Let me get my notes out, okay?
I hope we have more coming up here. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how to word my question per se, but kind of just listening to your conversation and resonating with questions I've had in the past. It seems to not just be a romanticizing of the past, but also a romanticizing of the end. We see that also like in the passage. They're like, we really wish we would just die right now. And I've heard that even from my friends of my age group, like, I'm just, like, there's a despair of, man, I'm just keep living for my friends and family. I know, I hear it's like suicidal thoughts, like, I know it would just be, like, it's wrong, so I just stay around for other people, but I just wish it would end. And even here, it's disheartening to me, but I hear a lot of older people also say, well, I don't want to live any longer. It's a romanticizing of, I just want to go to heaven sometimes, or it's just, well, there's no, I don't want to be a burden on other people. So there's this, romanticizing of the end. And, one of my friends who struggles with this quite a bit, and I just, continue to just give them space and to listen and, give them what resources I know. But it does add questions to mine of, how can we get past this romanticizing end? And for me as a younger guy, it's like, I don't want to argue. I'm not in that space like, no, you should want to keep living. But it's also like, dang, this is what I have to look forward to. It's wanting to die. So where is this, I guess, what's the healthiest, the thing that's actually, thriving and embracing life? Where's that, outlook and position, and what gives us this, past the, well, it was so good back then, which it might have been better back then, or, all we have is right now. But you can say, situationally, things might have been, better objectively, but how do we keep going?
This is a good question, Seth, and I do want to offer content warning regarding suicide and suicidal ideation. There was a time when I felt like I could tell somebody, oh my gosh, life is worth living. You just hang in there. And then this world started falling apart. And I understand the despair and the hopelessness. I'm not personally there, but I understand, people are looking, saying, I'm working 80 hours a week and I don't even have a savings account. I don't have anything left over to survive. What am I doing all this for? The housing crisis is just ridiculous. The food insecurity right now in Charlotte, the food banks are running out of boxes, right? So I used to be able to sort of say to people, just hang in there. We're gonna get you the support you need. And I still believe that. I still believe that there is community. And I think often what is lacking when people reach a state of despair that is hard to come back from is a lack of community, right? Community carries you. Community holds you accountable, but also you hold them accountable to taking care of each other, right? That's what community is supposed to do. And the pandemic also ripped that away from many people, which pushed them into deeper points of despair, because community wasn't as easy to access when we were all in quarantine or not able to see each other as frequently. So I don't know, Ben, what are you thinking about that?
Ooh, well, I think the interesting thing about what Seth brings up for me is the connection between your sermon this week and Tara's last week, and how Tara called out our propensity to live at the polarities and to obsess about the polarities instead of living in the middle, in the gray, in the mess, in the in-between place. And the reality is, this is why I think there are people of faith, Christians like myself, who like the low seasons of the church year better than they like the high seasons. I like Advent and Lent. You know, Christmas and Easter, I've been there, I've done that, you know, a lot, right? A lot. And so I thought that was interesting how Tara called out the beginning and the ends of Christmas and Easter, but who's living in the in-between with Jesus and all his teachings and his life and his words against the Pharisees, you know. And then it's the same here. We're romanticizing both the past and the future, right? It's always Christians talking about the good old days or heaven when they die. Nobody's ever talking about what life is going to be like now, right? And that's what I think you're pointing out. There's a propensity to do that even if you're not, you know, an evangelical Christian, for instance. You know, a lot of us have a propensity to do that just because nostalgia and anxiety are the places our brain goes. That's where our brains want to be, in nostalgia about the past or anxiety about the future. And so the hardest thing that the spiritual tradition has tried to help people to figure out how to do, and that Mia was calling us to do, and that Tara was calling us to do last week, is to live in the now. To live in the messy, gray, in-between, that is the regular, ordinary human experience of the now, this moment, and to try to figure out how to live and be present in the now. Every spiritual tradition is trying to give people resources, whether it be meditation, worship, prayer. I could go on and on about all the different ways in which the religious tradition, the perennial religious tradition of all, not just Christians, has tried to give people resources to be present, right? Now that can be very cliche, I think, and a lot of us make it cliche, but it's also real, and I think it's what the Exodus text is trying to give. You're in the wilderness, be in the wilderness. Live off the provisions I'm providing you in the wilderness. Don't save any for tomorrow. You don't need any tomorrow. Don't gather more than you need. You don't need that. I'm going to take care of you. All you have to do is trust.
It is countercultural, and it's counter-capitalism, which is about attaining to get to this final destination. And if you can't keep up with capitalism, well, what are you even living for? Right. You ain't never going to get that Corvette, that 7-bedroom house. What are you even... See, I think the culture pushes us even deeper into those places of despair. Right? And this, you know, I think this text in the wilderness, and the Israelites are in the wilderness all the time. You know, it calls us to sit with the wilderness, the now, the in-between, the not yet. What is it? The almost and not yet? Already and not yet. The already and not yet, right? The Exodus will never be... what's his name? Abraham Heschel said the Exodus has yet to be realized. Like, we've yet to complete the journey. We're always in it.
Yeah.
So kind of my expanding of that question, going into, being present, which I actually saw also in the passage, like the manna is, you know, just accepting. It's always like beginning, it's new every morning, it's enough for you. It reminded me so much about meditation practice. But me as someone who's not disabled or handicapped in any way, I can pay attention to my body and be pretty comfortable here, like just follow my breath. I have several friends, the friend that even I'm talking about, and others who have nervous damage, and they're women who get discarded by the medical community because they're just like, oh, it's all in your head, you're hysterical, and so they have seizures, they have like stuff where they itch all the time, just pain in their nervous system. And so even for them, like following their breath, like their body is in constant pain. Yeah. And we have people among us who live like that. I mean, in our church, in our community. Ben, you've said something about this related to mental health diagnosis, but I, again, believe that this is where community comes into place, right? To help those who may not be able to, your salvation is not solely dependent on you. Right.
It's
that's
communal.
A big question.
So if you, because of whatever your challenges are not unable to tap into that hope or unable to feel in your body the possibility for a better world or a more just world, that's when community, I think, is stepping in, right?
Well, one of the quotes from Station 11 that I was remembering as I was preparing to hear your sermon is that hell is the absence of people you love. And there is no solution, maybe medically, for your friends. There may not be a miraculous, spiritual solution either. There might not even be a meditative solution. There is only one thing, and that is friendship. The willingness to walk alongside someone as they go through pain. You can't make their pain go away. You can't solve their pain. You can't fix people. People have to walk their journey, and there's some deeply human truth in this, right? Mm-hmm. That all we really have is solidarity. We keep saying solidarity is the goal, but it's really all we have.
It's the journey.
It's walking with each other, pain and no pain, walking through hell, walking through heaven, wherever we're walking, walking through life in the in-between.
If you can't walk, your friends will carry you, like they did in the Gospels.
Right. That's right.
They carried their friend Jesus, who couldn't get to Jesus, right? That's community, communal salvation. Monica Coleman talks about communal salvation. I say it in every sermon. People get tired of me. It's fine. Monica Coleman, but she talks about communal salvation. That's the only way we're going to be saved, right? And it's a different view of salvation, right, from some of our previous knowledge, right? But for your friends or for your community, that's it.
Yeah, friendship.
Yeah, I mean, just go to the epistle where it talks about the fellowship of suffering. I would love a church being called the fellowship of suffering.
We might not get a lot of people coming to that
the
church.
Fellowship of Suffering Church at Myers Park.
But I think that's true. And even when I hear from them, and I've asked, like, what can I do or support or have empathy? And I guess that's the question which I ask myself, like, and even they feel like I've said it so many times, like this pain, and like gone to this many therapists or this many doctors and so on, and I just like I the only thing I think is like, hey, you can have the phone open and I can listen and we can just cry together.
Yeah.
There's maybe no more words to be said that haven't already been said because it's just a constant.
And the question is always for the people that I check in on, are you safe and do you have what you need? Whether that's food, whether that's housing, the essentials, like are you fed? Did you eat, right? Those are, sometimes that's the questions that you ask. You don't have a solution, you don't have a miracle cure, you don't have a healing. You just, are you safe today and do you have what you need? That's community.
That's the end of our time. Let's give Mia a round of applause for her work and her sermon. Thank you so much, Mia.
Oh, thanks, man. Thank y'all.